I started when I was in 6th grade. So I've been doing technology before technology was cool. And it, to me, kind of my give back. It's like, here's the thing. You grow up black. I'm not. You grow up black. And you run into those people that always say, well, what do you do? What do you get? What have you done? You sell out, that whole thing. My give back is sharing what I've learned, helping other people to find the benefit in what I call the innovation economy that can help, it can change lives. And not in this, like, the cloud is parting and the sky and great things happening. It's just about changing lives and giving people opportunities to kind of, provide for themselves, provide for their families, and have a successful career. Most of the technology my company uses, you can download software. You can learn about programming. You can create your own career with stuff that's available for free. But I think the key point comes to what a couple of people said on stage already. It's really just about exposure. Yes, I run a company. Let me talk about a company first. So I run we're a digital services agency. You come to us with an idea for a mobile solution, website, application, whatever, and if you have money, we will go. If we like the idea and you don't have money, we will work with you from a cash equity perspective to help launch a solution and find out a way to be successful. But my other passion really is around spreading the word about technology and how it can change lives. I'm also a co-founder of an organization called Startup Middle School. And the emphasis is on exposure, which touches on what everyone here has been saying. I've gone to career days to talk to kids. Who here does like you said about a doctor? You ask about a lawyer, you ask about a dentist, the hands shoot up. But if you don't know something, the other thing we try to do is make not only kids, but also adults, professionals aware that the innovation economy is more about is about more than coders. I spoke yesterday at Howard University Business School. And a couple of students came up to me and said, so what does this have to do with business? Right? What does this have to do with business? I mean, you guys read code. Why do I care? I have an MBA for it. And it changed my whole perspective on what I do, because when you write software, if you're just a pure developer, you're excited about writing code. I don't care what you do with it, but look how good the code is. Right? But the difference between what we try to do in my company, what I tried to express to these students, was that technology is just a way to solve business problems. That's all it is. And so the importance to the business schools kids and the importance to the people who aren't coders on why the innovation economy has space for you at the table is that at the end of the day, if whatever you build doesn't help that business meet their goals and make money, it will fail. No one cares how great the code is. No one cares how many great coders I have in my business phase. At the end of the day, it's about making money, running a successful business, meeting your objectives, and so that's why business matters. So in the camp that we run and the program that we do at Howard University Middle School, and also what I do with my company, is we make sure that the focus should be on solving a problem, and the technology is kind of secondary to it. So we teach the kids about user interface design, we teach the kids about team building, we teach the kids about communications. All of those are fields that people that don't have a computer science background can take part in the innovation economy and turn out to be successful. And I think that it's important that we share that message whenever we talk about it. That's why I very rarely say STEM. If I ask everyone in the room to close their eyes and what's the first thing that comes to their mind when I say STEM, it's probably not something that's very appealing to a lot of young kids. Probably not something that's appealing to people in the business space, because they're like STEM, science, technology, engineering, math. By the way, I did horrible at math. Horrible. If it was up to math, I wouldn't graduate from math. Computers are really, once again, I'll say the innovation economy is really about creating solutions to solve problems in businesses, and that's kind of what my company attempts to do, that I attempt to do. And my last comment here, to keep it short, is there was an event here on Friday, last Friday, I'll take you on. And and you know, I think it was you mentioned it, the panel, we were talking about it, someone said, who here has a software business? A bunch of people raised their hand. Then he said, who here outsources software development? He said, who here outsources software development? Software developers out. Nobody raised it. And one of my views here as a software developer, just in DC, I'm keeping on a small scale, is we send it to Europe, we send it to India, we send it outside of our community. It's got to be both ways, right? So I'm going to work with these guys, and we're going to figure out a way so that when I need help, when I have overflow work, that I can leverage some of the guys that they have. So I can spread the wealth, I can spread the knowledge, and we can have a relationship here that can kind of benefit more than just myself. Because at the end of the day, I think once again it comes back to, you know, what is the difference that you make here? How can you, once again, change lives? And party word, I have 5 kids. I have grown kids, I have kids. And I basically say the same thing to both of them. It's, you know, when I go to bed at night, I think back to my day and I said, if my son asks me, why did I do something, am I going to be able to tell him something that I'm proud of, right? And so that's how now that I'm not a foolish thing to do when you're young, right? Now that I've learned and I'm older, that's how I try to run my business. That's how I try to run my life. And you know, hopefully I get to kind of touch other people's lives through my business and the opportunity you have as a business owner. Thank you very much. And also, just thank you for being here on this opportunity to talk to you about some things like that.
Thank you. Coders4Africa. Good, perfect. So we have our final speaker, and after that we'll move to the panels. So Coders4Africa, who's walking up the stage right now, has more than a decade of experience in entrepreneurship, technology services, and program management. Mr. Srafel has led the Africa expansion of the Microsoft Build Your Business Entrepreneurship course, managed large ed tech projects in Tanzania, delivering digital content to youth, and developed smartphone applications that provide geo-heritage information on African American history and culture sites.
Thank you. Just as a quick note, you know the difference between someone that was raised in the hip-hop generation or not, but how they hold the mic. So I've changed up my style, but I used to hold the mic like this. This rap career doesn't really help, but I'm gonna hold it like this. Real quick, maybe the exercise, I downloaded it. Hopefully this will keep me accountable to somebody out there. Thank you for the Coders4Africa team. I think it's critical that we're here today, and I hope if anybody has connections with the Post or any media outlets, you know, folks who are tweeting, get this on there. Like a lot of times we have great events like this, and you won't hear about it the next day. And so it's critical because nowadays you're hearing a lot of terms around like Afropolitan, Afro what, Afro whatever, but having this kind of pseudonym so that we have Afro user interface folks, Afro programmers, Afro project managers is key. So let me go and kind of use the format that I was using to kind of talk about who I am and some of the stuff that I'm working on. So I've been in and around technology entrepreneurship in Africa for about 14 years, different corners through NGOs, SMEs on the continent, and even ventures. I'm on my 4th one now. And through that, I've had a lot of experience. Monster Labs was essentially developed or started sort of in reflection of that. And the statistics that we the last week around the GDP growth rates and in all of the development of the business environment across Africa, but understanding that a lot of the startups and SMEs essentially face the same challenges that startups and SMEs do here, which is that ongoing support and advice after they've launched. So who's there to be sort of a trusted advisor that can connect them with, whether it's the business or technical needs that they have, that can get them to grow their product or maybe even become more attractive to investors. There's research that's come out of even the Kenyan ecosystem that says that despite sort of the energy that's there and the life, you have stagnation after the first launch their product. These are access to funds and access to finance, which is true, even though there is even more interesting data that says that a lot of, which is probably even here with entrepreneurs here in the minority community, that they stay self-funded longer than, let's say, most of the entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley, for instance. But then there's also access to skills, access to that critical information that any firm, anytime, even mine, needs. And so we were launched in that spirit, basically to assist them in making that match. So we're very focused around advisory, very focused around matchmaking, and then also managing relationships between advisors and advisees to make sure that that skills transfer takes place. The firm also does support around technology and education, as I mentioned here. The last 3.5 years of my career was around that in the developing world, mostly in East Africa. So what we do is try to, I don't know who's here, someone else here that made the presentation around EdTech. A lot of deals happen in DC. So, there's a lot of education, health related projects that happen in DC that impact Africa. So deal flow, just like Silicon Valley is hot for startups, if you're into EdTech, ed, health, ag, DC is the spot for that. So what we try to do is make sure those projects happen. One, they sort of include as a holistic process as possible to make sure that we're not dumping computers in classrooms, but that they sort of abide by some very simple sustainability rules so that the projects can be long-lasting. And two, frankly speaking, plug those projects in with local entrepreneurs. So sort of in the space of outsourcing, project work, client work out to folks on the continent, but actually saying, if you have a project, for instance, one proposal that we went on, if you're going to do, for instance, an ag job training project in West Africa, why aren't you leveraging a startup that's doing job matching that's already launched it? And so trying to create more deals. So for us, in my company, our firm basically is measured by how we're able to grow businesses to get more deals, to grow more, to get more investments. Sort of in the last question, which I thought was a very interesting one around, if I was in an African country right now, what would be my ultimate contribution? Honestly, I think being in diaspora, we very much underplay and underestimate our amplification, sort of our ability to amplify voices in here. And we make a lot of the same mistakes that other folks make about going in and kind of crowding out. So I think for me, I'm always interested in listening and figuring out, like, who's the genius in the room? What's the firm that's coming out with the next object? So when I go to any country or any setting, I'm always just happy to learn and kind of figure out, like, who needs to be brought forward to get that next set of resources. And that's the principle that especially at this stage in my career, that I focus on. So thank you very much.
Thank you for that. Thank you for all the speakers. So the next segment will be 3 panels, and we'll have just 15 minutes of the presentations, the panel, and then 15 minutes for Q&A. So the first one, the first panel will be on technology and content that is relevant to Africa. Our panelists are Ali
First I went to work with Coders in Africa to some capacity, able to talk about the problems with the distribution of content in Africa and how can technology be a help. The first participant on partner with John AJ, I was actually supposed to participate in this panel, but I was when I was talking to the crowd and I talked to Johnny, it turns out that he's actually an expert in that area, so I moved myself back from the panel. I rather host it. Then Mr. Albert, we call Mr. Albert. Before we introduce Mr. Abdullah Al, like something like then we have Mr. Dawda Bai, who's like one of the pioneers in terms of information, like for setting up that, that was, if you were in the diaspora, that was the site that you go to the news about setting up. Then we have, of course, our own in-house committee is going to bring, I think, the Coders4Africa twist on affiliation. So, our first question we're going to talk about, when we talk about content, we're going to leave the discussion to, let's say, the main two types of contents that are popular in Africa, and that's music, and in the world, for that matter, it's music and film distribution. And I don't know if you all heard about iRoku, which is a company that was founded by a Nigerian entrepreneur, and it's basically the next fix for Nollywood. We all know that Nollywood is a very powerful industry. Right now, we're talking about numbers goes from 500 million to 800 million a year type of business, and it's the second largest industry in terms of volume, just the number of movies that are produced every year. It's the second to volume in Hollywood compared. But so iRoku exists. It provides access to this content library, but most of its user base is based overseas. It's for people like me that live in diaspora that want to have that connection to back home to that platform. So my first question to the panel is, why is it that the most popular platform, like from going international, why is it that the most popular platform for accessing some really valuable African content is available, is mostly available to Africans in diaspora? And what, what's your take on it, and how do you go about this?
I think the question.
The question is, like, iRoku exists, it gives you access to this content, but the majority of its user base is outside of Africa. So we want content for Africans to be consumed by Africans on the continent. So what do you think, why
believe personal rules and regulations. Government need to jump on the train, like I was saying, because I think the folks taking decisions and making decisions such as protecting intellectual properties and all those kind of things. So I think it comes down to educating the whole consumer prospect, not only government, not only artists or only consumers, but just the general population that these are intellectual properties. And
I think that's the drive. We have all those architecture things.
no, we don't. As far as technology wise,
I'm saying it nice and close, but you just look at it and go right to the banner. Just because it's cheap. So I think it's been tried, but I don't think information only is a solution.
I think that's a very challenging issue. You can have all the regulations you want. We do have some lawyers in the room, they can probably tell you that. But the problem with the internet is you have an issue with which laws apply. Where is your server? If you have a server hosted in a different country, that may exempt you from laws which were voted in any other country. So that's a challenge. We're talking about music, but it's a very old trade, e-commerce, old issue that deal with money and taxation, laws. So that's the big challenge. And even we're talking about Africa. One of the big issues in Africa is government control over information. We can see how government traditionally have tried to limit access to information, or even any information from going out to the public. But with technology, we just lost that battle. And on the same aspect, it's the same issue with these laws and regulations. How do you? If I host my server here in the U.S., definitely U.S. laws and regulations may apply better than if I host my server in China or in Slovenia. You just.
and I believe the whole delivering traditional ways of delivering content and music have changed. There are several new things to try, and we just, I think, need to be more creative on the way to deliver the products, music content, whether it's music content or anything else.
Not really on that. That's really a value proposition. It's not longer a matter of just distributing something and selling it for price. You have to consider also what the part of it is. I'll just give another example. For example, in the gaming industry, some independent developers are trying to they will bundle a bunch of different games that they sell together at a cheap price, and then offer the user the ability to pay what they want. And they actually make more money that way than giving yourself rights. So you have to make a value proposition. So it's not just the government that has to solve this. It's also the private individuals that have to do something to be creative.
Thank you for the answers. We'll start taking questions from the crowd.
If you have any questions, you can just line up here. I have the mic.
I got one.
Again, my name is Leroy Wilson Jr. I'm from New York and Botswana. With family connections to Uganda as well. What I'd like to do is just to give you some information, because when a law was first being debated and passed, I had asked a friend of mine who was the Assistant Commissioner for Trademarks and Copyrights in the U.S. Patent Office to do a survey of the African countries to find out what the intellectual property regimes were. There weren't that many at that time. Now, what I'd like to do, and I'm not going to take up any more time, is to leave a person, and of course I know everybody has their own life, but just an exceptionally talented woman who is an intellectual property lawyer in South Africa. She is a notable school official, which is one of the top intellectual property lawyers on the African continent. And so I really think that in the kinds of things that I'm trying to do professionally as well, that it would be helpful to coordinate with her so that she could help in this issue. Because, and one last point, things that the countries don't realize is that intellectual property is valuable property. And I think in the education process and in giving them information, if you take a look at what kind of intellectual property revenues are being generated in the United States through royalties, likenesses, and all those kinds of licenses, this might throw a different light on how they see this kind of asset.
Thank you.
We'll take 3 questions first, and you guys
Hi everyone, my name is Sheikh Kane. I'm also in the IT field, mostly e-commerce, the field that was mentioned before. And looking at the questions that was raised in the panel initially, it did bring in an interesting question from my perspective that I wanted to share with the panel and hear some thoughts on. And that is technology as a driver for change, which I think is part of this conversation we had. I believe in the United States there are 2 types of ways technology is used in more traditional business. So I see a lot of the Silicon Valley businesses driving a new type of classic business per se. As a matter of fact, a lot of new e-commerce businesses, such as Netflix, as you mentioned, revolutionize a more traditional Hollywood model. So there's been battles with that. We have the Uber example, where people with great ideas create a new business model. And you also have another side of that coin where technology serves more of a support role into a more traditional industry, such as the banking industry or any other e-commerce-based industry. So my question for that, and this is in a country like the United States where we have a very solid system. In Africa, as we know, and it's been mentioned, the government sometimes have a lot of gap in some of these more basic infrastructure. So my thought was, do we think technology should serve more of a supportive role in that battle, or should technology take more of a driver's seat and cause change in government, and how do you think that could happen?
Thank you. I thought that was a fantastic question. How can technology drive change in these places? My name is Rory. As I mentioned before, I worked for the last 4 years in Uganda, and I was trying to start a business there, but trying to start a business inspired me to create an anti-corruption NGO called Not in My Country. By the way, we've just started an initiative, the case for an international anti-corruption court. So if you go to anticorruptioncourt.org, we're looking for signatures for a petition. And if anybody wants to read more about that case, we'd love to have your voices and your thoughts. Sorry for the brief plug. To echo what this gentleman just said, I think what I'd love to point out, and I'd really like to hear comments. I mean, Africa is the last place on earth where a majority of people don't have access to electricity. And we're here talking about the internet, but before people have the internet, quite often it's helpful if they have electricity. How can they get electricity if it requires the government that people building infrastructure? Now, I think that there's an interesting intersection, because how do you get an accountable government? The best way to do that is decentralizing the means of disseminating information. And it's interesting that we have these leapfrog technologies through cell phones. People are getting cell phones before they're even getting electricity. We're working on a project that I'd love to collaborate with people on, because we were talking about various technologies that folks have. So radio is present in 70% of African households, whereas 60% of African households don't have electricity. We're working on a little device that can actually transmit on an FM band a radio signal, and it's a transmitter that'll fit in your pocket. It's based on a Raspberry Pi, and it's mobile, and we developed it for a dissident group that wants to broadcast their views because the government is censoring radio. Yeah. Sure, I'm sorry. So the question is, how can we use technology effectively to sort of decentralize messages and information so we can hold governments accountable and bring the change that we're looking for.
Obviously, I'm not sure what that has to do with music, content, the panel. I don't know where you can answer that question.
Well, I mean, I can take I mean, I can give it a shot. I guess many people before me who are here did mention that technology is just a tool basically to solve problems, you know. Just like any tool, I mean, how you use it will define what you do with it. I mean, you can use the best tool in the world to commit the most horrible crime. I mean, same thing applies for technology. You know, what do you use technology for? If you use it to solve people's problem or challenges, I mean, that's just great. But we see people use technology to, you know, to fraud, to steal, to, I mean, it depends how you use it. Now, to go back to your question, I mean, I guess the same answer will apply. You know, I don't think that technology in itself is taking, you know, either, you know, the lead or backseat. I mean, it's just, you know, what's the vision? What's the goal? What are you applying the technology to achieve or to do? So it's really, you know, what motivates people, in my opinion, that defines it. So
just quickly that me personally, I think that people drive change may make it go faster. So you know, we have certain access to certain type of technology that can influence or reach someone goes faster. But if you really want to change, the people have to react one way or the other. And think about it. So as you mentioned earlier, it really depends on what we want to do, how we want to do it, and what we think now is something that are important. We have to use technology to first educate, whether it is just cultural, you know, understanding each other, being, you know, knowing what's going on in the world, and knowing your environment, knowing what you do. That's where it starts, you know? And then from there, it builds solutions for practical problems that the country may have.
All right, any more questions? Then we wrap it. I want to thank everybody on the panel.
Say cheese to you too.
So the next panel, we on Startup Deep Dive, African Tech Startups, Local and Global. Our panelists are Kwame Anda, Chico Gadi, Sena Megaton, and Aaron Sanders. Please come to the stage.
So see, this is the family. This is what people are saying. First, US Coders for Africa. So there is a deal.
Good afternoon, everyone.
This is now. This is.
No, they didn't hear me because they're still asleep from lunch. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna need y'all to do a little stretch for me. Can y'all stand up for a second and just stretch, and then sit back down? Like, you know, just stretch. Come on, I see you trying not to do it. Yeah, just stretch for me. There you go. There you go. All right. Now we can all have a seat. Good afternoon, everyone. So it's great to see all of you out here on a Saturday afternoon. My name is Anna Ake. I have a technology news platform. It's called Innovative. If you're on Twitter, you see the big red symbol. We highlight blacks in technology in the US, UK, and Africa. So check us out. But on to the panel. So we're going to just jump right in and talk about disruptive technology trends that we're seeing within technology. One of the things that we published recently was an article on some students from Uganda who created an application that allows you to not only not have to go get your hand pricked to test to see if you have malaria, you can actually use this app, stick your finger in, smartphone, stick your finger in, and then it can test to see if you have malaria. I thought that that was pretty impressive. So that's my point of view of what was disruptive. So I want you to talk about what you've seen that's been disruptive within technology.
I can start. I mean, I think for me, like I can really think of two things. One of the things mainly that people in Ghana complain about is, companies are customer centric, right? Company like telcos, they just put stuff out there. There's no customer service, so people are, they're mad. They want to find a way to get back. And I think one of there's a startup named Shopify, which basically came up with, you go on these websites and you see the way that you can chat with the. I thought that was brilliant. That was very brilliant for Ghana because that was just something that people want. Like, it may not, I don't know if you consider that disruptive, but I definitely do, because that puts, that's like venting the consumer can go directly to the telcos and express exactly how they feel. I think another thing that kind of caught my eye was on Kickstarter. I think it was called Brick. It was like this kind of router that I think it was developed by a South African. This was a thing, right? Yeah, there was a guy from the and it basically allows you to connect to the internet anywhere. It's like a big black rugged box, and I thought that was very interesting because that's something people always complain about. Hey, we can't get online, and this is something that would possibly save lives, in that situations. So I mean, those are the two things that I can think about.
Well, I'm actually going to talk about the concept of disruptive technology. I would say that in Africa, it's actually the easiest place to have disruptive technology, right? And I do think that what we need to do is to start looking at disruptive technology locally. Okay, what is it that we can bring to market? What is it that we can develop that would change the way we do things locally? I'm not even saying nationally, locally. Okay, you mentioned something about this app that you use to find out about malaria.
Right.
I was in Senegal recently, and there was something to find out and manage sickle cell anemia. Another thing to manage diabetes. And all I'm talking about right now is in the health sector. In Ghana, there's spot kill, something to track medication and see if they're exactly legit and that kind of stuff. But I do believe that to get disruptive technology, you need to help people. Some of the things that Coders4Africa saying that they're going to do. Because one of the things that I noticed is people have the skills. Okay? They have skills. Now what we need to do is help them achieve and then bring stuff to market that are going to change lives locally before we even go global.
No, that's a good point, and I'm going to change that subject real quick because that was my next question, so you led right into it. So, any one of you gentlemen can answer this one. Let's speak about tech competitions where it's Demo, then it's Demo Africa, then it's Techstars. Let's talk about those competitions and tell me, do you think that that's good for a young entrepreneur or anybody that's never been in any type of technology or they're keeping their ideas? Do you think it's good for them to enter the competition?
So I don't want to say I'm a capitalist at heart, but it's safe space. Okay. I think competition breeds innovation, and I think one of my largest critiques of a lot of the startups that I run, that I look through or I talk to, is that one, they're not aware of their competitors, and two, they haven't vetted their idea against their competition, right? And the more times you get an opportunity to pitch your idea, the more times that you talk to people about it, the better your idea becomes. It becomes better polished, and the more people that are probably attracted to it if it's a viable idea, a viable business. So I think competition is, for people, there are steps to take in terms of getting to, some of the bigger competitions, but I think competition is good in terms of learning the skill set to understand, to communicate and evangelize your idea, to get stakeholders involved. And I think that more people, younger people should be involved in these competitions.
Aaron, I want you to talk about, they're involved in the competition. You get yourself in there, and you didn't win. So obviously, you may or may not, have the money now. So let's talk about funding. Did you bootstrap it, or how did you get your funding to start your company?
I bootstrapped my own company. But I'll touch on I was actually talking to people here about these hackathons and these other events, and I agree 100%. You need to go. You'll probably lose most likely. But it's the learning experience that matters. There's a couple of things. You learn, you network, you might get exposed to some new technology or some new idea that you haven't even thought of that you can somehow leverage better. Because the reality is, in this game, it's about the execution. There are a lot of people that have great ideas that will just never happen. So if you can execute faster, better, smarter, you're going to win. The other thing is there's a lot of ideas. There's some of the crowd who I actually talks with about this concept. There are a lot of ideas that people come up with in the U.S. that just will fly here that can be successful other places. And she brought that to me, made me aware of that because I hadn't even thought about it. And so we're a services company. And we have piles of ideas of things that we just hacked around with that are just kind of sitting in GitHub, sitting in a code repo that we have never even, I didn't want to say GitHub, I don't know how many people do it that much, just sitting there. That potentially can be used somewhere else, or the idea can be given to someone else who would be successful. The other thing is interesting is, changing people here in the United States, like myself, perspective on, like what you said, what is disruptive, right? There might be something sitting in my pile of code that would be disrupted somewhere else that I would never ever know unless I'm going to a hackathon, going to an event like this, and spoke to someone else.
Right. And with all of your experiences up here, you talked about bootstrapping, I bootstrap it, but not everyone can do that. So what would you recommend? For those out here that might have the next great idea, and they don't have that funding, what resources would you tell them to use?
Well, first I will quickly address the issue of competition because it's if you are involved in Africa, you know that it's a key issue, right? Because I tell my young guys, what is the point of competition? Okay, because if you are just going to go to a competition for the sake of winning, and then your application go pick up dust in the Google Play or whatever it is, you're missing the point. I'd rather not you go and work hard on your application, understand how it will work, try to solve that solution, solve that problem. Then you have achieved something. When you do go to market, people take you seriously. So that's the first point.
So solving a problem.
So, yeah, solve a problem.
Right.
The second thing is the nature of venture capital, the nature of angels, the nature of people behind this competition, based on my personal experience in the field, is quite different than it is over here. Okay? People are trying to make a name for themselves. the so-called ventures. If I misspeak, I would say vultures, but then I would say ventures. Okay. So it's like the Far West where everybody is trying to make a name, and I would say be careful where you go. The key thing is work hard. To the question of funding, I think it was Amadou mentioned something. What is the key thing that these developers have? Skills, right? What was happening before this or whatever things? People were building tools for local businesses, they were doing things. They have marketable skills. They have things that they can actually use. So I use what I call the 70-30% approach. Like, why don't you use 30% of your time to make some money, okay? 30% of the time to make money, and then you can use the 70% remaining time to develop something that might or might not work, okay? So either you join with me, you find work somewhere, or you go on these e-lancing things. There are some pretty good platforms out there where you can make money if you have the right skills. And a lot of the young people I work with do that. I mean, they're on e-lanes, they're on this, they're working with people, they're making money, and they're having time to work on their project.
Let me ask something really quickly. I think if you do have a day job, don't quit it. You know, use your day job to hopefully fuel that dream of yours. It can go either way. You can quit, maybe you have a great idea, but there's that risk, you know, that you're not sure of. Yeah, so just wanted to add that.
Just a couple of book recommendations. The Lean Startup Methodology. Read that. Customer driven. They're like startups are, and then there's the Lean Startup Manual by Steve Blank. Is that it? And once you read that and you read the other areas, I think it's Eric Aries. Yeah, thank you. I don't know, but we'll read it, and when you read it, you'll start to realize that you have to have enough resources for to translate your idea into value for at least a couple of customers. Once you get to that point, that's when you start to build upon your idea and get to the point where you can scale and get to the point where you can scale a company. So I think one of the problems with a lot of entrepreneurs is that they try to attack a huge space. And when they try to attack a huge space, that's very expensive in terms of money and time. So start small and scale, and then once you've gotten to that point, you can start to attack other problems when you have the resources.
Okay, so just to summarize, because we're almost out of time and we have to open it up for questions. You've learned never bite off more than you can chew, because we all think we can do that. I don't know why, but it's human nature. We just do it anyway. And then, we learned that don't quit your day job, because you're going to need it to support this grand next big idea that we generally come up with that we may think it's disruptive, and then next thing you know, it's sitting in a corner somewhere. So you lose time, you lose money. So last but not least, there's resources. The resources are, somebody mentioned Lean Startup. There's lots of sites that has information. Google is like the best tool ever. So if you Google anything Google, you'll see how to go in and just do landing pages just to get an idea if your idea is even viable. So at this point, we're going to open it up for you to ask questions. We have lots of experience up here, so if there's any ideas that you think, burning deep inside, these are the people to ask right now. I just wanted to get the names of the book. You went pretty fast there, Ryan.
The startup manual. Steve Blank. Almost the Bible, but not really.
Anyone else with questions?
Yes, I was volunteering again. I just wanted to push on one point that you guys made from a recent experience I had. with a friend that's a developer in California. As you mentioned, he had that 70-30% rule. I think that's great. One tool that's out there for people in technology is that you can work from home because you're not bound to an office. And I see a lot more people leveraging that. And I was just in New York and met a friend from LA who took a month and a half off of he's renting LA and just got a place in New York where he's working on a regular schedule there, and he's just looking at new opportunities and essentially looking for new ways to expand his career while still maintaining a daytime job. So I think that's a great leverage that you can use as well when negotiating a new job, just having the option to manage your time.
I want to just add one other takeaway that wasn't mentioned before. It's the money part, right? So a lot of people fall in love with their idea and nobody else likes it, right? But they just fall in love with it. This is the greatest thing, this is the greatest thing, this is the greatest thing. So make sure that someone else likes your idea other than you. Yeah, someone else than you. The second thing is get your numbers together. It has to add up. We, as a services company, people come to us a lot of time with ideas, and they're great, but then we're like, so what's it going to cost for you to develop it? How are you going to market it? What kind of staff do you need? Who are your competitors? None of that stuff they've thought through, and they're like, well, I didn't think about that. It's not that you have to know everything, but find someone who can share your vision with you that can help you through that. Because once you do have that app, and once you do try to go to the vultures or whoever, or anyone even for an angel round, venture, sorry. Even for that angel round, they're going to start to ask you those questions, and if you just your eyes kind of gloss over, it's a wrap.
Right. One more question for all of you, and then this is kind of quick. How long did it take to you to get from your idea to actual platform? Was that 6 months, a year, 2 years, 4 years? Yeah, and y'all have answers. I see everyone just like, why did she ask this question? Like,
I'll start first. I have a services company, and I cheated. I kind of did what these guys said. I work for the government as a contractor, as a contract developer for the intelligence community. Very high bill rate for the government, and I just basically pocketed my money. I saved my money while I was still working for the government, the 70/30 rule. I started my consulting business. It picked up mobile contracts on the side so that when I was ready to go, I had a soft landing.
I think it's pretty much the same for all of us. We all have day jobs, which is funny. People always like, wait, you guys have real day jobs? I'm like, yeah, we do, and we never quit it. We use that as a way to further what our dreams and our passion. And it's like you get home at 5, you may have children at home you need to take care of, and you're back on your grind till midnight, 1 or 2. So that's about 2, 3.
It took a year and a half, but most of it was financed by business school loans. So killing 2 birds with 1 stone in a sense. I really did. Based on our I got the value back and then some. So it's good, right? Yeah. Good ROI.
Oh, yeah, but another thing that is also important is the nature of the startup, right? Yeah. This young guy that I talked about is my business partner, co-founder of Tech. He told me this one. He's like, you know what? I like to solve problems. I like to find solutions, okay? And I think if your startup, if you have big problems to solve, right? And you identify, let's say, a smaller problem to solve that you can work on between 3 and 6 months. Take it to market. You have your target, and you thought about revenues. You thought about all this stuff. Your success rate is going to be probably high. Now you're not going to sell it for $1 billion, but it's going probably to help you work on that $1 billion project.
Right. You had a question, sir?
Yes. Quick question. I was discussing earlier with Mr.
I don't want to pronounce.
You ready?
Yeah, you ready? Yeah, about data and analytics, and I would like to ask quickly, what can African companies benefit from companies like you? Because we come back to, once again, data, research markets, and all that. How do we start African companies, for instance? How can they benefit from? Yeah, thank you.
So this is from a off the record conversation. Well, not off the record, but off this. We had a previous conversation, off the stage conversation. What we do that's very important. We take a very data-driven approach to supporting companies that we work with, and selecting the companies that we work with as well. So a lot of the products and services that we're building right now are very much based on my interests around analytics. And one thing that I would recommend for a lot of companies that are on the continent right now that are looking for data, ways to leverage data, is to first off, take a step back. What are your business goals? Identify your business goals, and then see what data sources you have around. To say, okay, I know what my business goals are. I have these data sources. Now, what metrics do I want to make? And once you start having those conversations, you can actually, I remember my first analytics assignment was on an Excel sheet. You can start tracking it from there, and then as you have to deal with more data, as you get more capacity as an organization, as you get more data literate, you can start to scale, and by the time you know it, you're playing around with Hadoop.
Data drives everything. Even we build mobile solutions, and we'll talk to a client, and we say, "What's your analytics strategy?" Oh, what's that? They don't get it. It's all about the numbers. Even when you have your concept for your solution or whatever, you can start with just something as simple as a landing page with an email list. You push it out on social media and see what kind of interest you get. If no one's coming, you might want to change something. That's data, right? You launch your application, and everyone says, "Oh, well, how many downloads I got?" It's beyond that. You got N number of downloads. Then where did people go in the app? When did they stop using the app? All of it comes back to data, which circles back around to the conversation I had earlier when I was presenting and I was talking to the business people. Business decisions are made based off of data, right? So you've got to have that data.
Just to piggyback off that too, it's great to have data, and it's also even much better to be able to draw insight from all the data you have, right? So you can have 50 million Excel sheets with numbers in there, but if you can't see a trend that's going up or down and optimize that trend over a period of time, then, forget about it, right? So, another thing too, if you have a company in Africa that's looking to get, insights on analytics, make sure the tool you use is able to capture stuff offline, right? And then push it back later on, because, the internet is going to go off, it's going to come back on, or what have you. But it's definitely a big thing also to piggyback on what he said, to know your business objectives and your business goals. It should really start there. Because based on that, then you can get your key performance indicators, and then you build your metrics, and then you start measuring. And it's a cycle, right? So you find something that you want to improve upon, you change something, you do your A/B testing, and it's continuously. If African companies could do that on a regular basis, it would be amazing, really.
Another book recommendation: Lean Analytics. Just add lean to anything. Lean Analytics. It's a good. It's my sub Bible.
And because we were talking about traits like Mr. Owl, right? Mr. Owl knows content, right? Now, you would think that, we all know here that one of the key things in Africa is content. That's the gold mine, right? Now, what we try to do at eTry Labs is to get the developer to work with you, right? Because that's easy. You got the guy who knows how to code, and he has an idea, and he wants to do media. You know media, right? So that's an aspect that we don't cover much, but if the math teacher can be in an environment, we kind of call it a little hub, with the coder, and they work together, they can develop products that are going to be successful. If the coder is trying to do the math guy's job, that's why we waste time. So it's another thing that I mean, in this room, I think I talk education, I talk health, I talk a bunch of things already. And these are people who want solutions, okay? I would rather the developer guy trust them for, okay, understand what they're trying to achieve and use tools to help them achieve it, and they all can reap the benefit.
Right. You have 1 minute because I want to ask you the last question.
Just real quickly, pick up what he said, and also, actually, in Lean Startup, they actually talk about that same concept there. So Lean, just remember Lean.
Look at the book. Lean. Just look at the books. Lean.
So the idea of putting the content/idea people in the same room with the developers is definitely critical to success. What if we have a process called Clarity that we work with our clients, where we basically get all of the key stakeholders in the room and we just listen and they start talking. And a quick anecdote of something happened last week. So we have a new client who is, she just mentioned to us that she provides services where she can quickly get your hair done in a gym. That's what she does. It's called Glam and Go. But she mentioned that her original customers, when she first started out, before she had a mobile app, they used to just text her all the time. That's how they would text their appointment requests or whatever, right? And so we're just sitting in a room, and I'm like, well, do they still do that now? She's like, yeah, it's annoying. They text me, and then I got to take their text message, and I got to log into the system, put it in. And just to that meeting, I said, well, why don't we just connect the system to SMS? So they can just send a text message, we go into the system, see if it's available, text them back and say yes or no, or give them an option. Like that happened because the technical guy was sitting in the room with them to discuss the idea, and we might actually take that idea ourselves and run with it and go a different direction, because there's a lot of people who are still just using SMS.
Right.
And there's already a system that kind of manages appointments and all other stuff, but it's not connected to SMS.
I had a question, but by the way, Africans, that's how they build like most of the app, the SMS. All right, question. You mentioned lean. Where's that coming from? Who are the originator of the lean concept, and what industry did it start from?
So to be completely honest, right? Steve Blank is Steve Blank is what people look to as kind of like the godfather of the lean startup, or the lean methodology. But it's actually an engineering. Well, it's actually an engineering concept that was created by developers to kind of decrease the amount of risk in kind of iterating, or not even iterating, building a product and then the customer not liking the product, or having to go back to not having to go back and rebuild something based on like scope creep, which is, you send something back to the customer and they don't like it, and they say, oh, you could add three more things. So the lean methodology is more focused on building pieces and getting costs back. And to be complete, and then to take this a step further than that, this same concept has been on the continent for a while. Like I've seen, I mean, a while is not my life, but I've seen other examples of this concept in kind of social projects and things like that, from Nigeria at least. So I mean, while it has been developed by engineers and godfathered by Steve Blank, I think there's a lot to say that it exists culturally on the continent.
Let me add one more thing. You gotta go one step further. Lean was started in the engineering industry with Toyota, Japanese. They were tired of always rebuilding the car from scratch. They're the first one to create these components that you can plug in into So the software industry, which is younger than the engineering industry, took the time to learn from all the practices. So software engineering was not a concept for industry, it was just programming, right? So they learned from other things to better the way we build software. So that's really where it comes from Japanese, from Toyota.
Yeah, I have a question for you guys. This is the last question for Coders4Africa, because I heard you guys mention, the big data. So now I want to ask you, let's talk about the entrepreneurs that have actually created all this information, have all this data on all these users. Are you now going to go back, to Africa and say, hey, listen, you've got this, now let us, show you how to use this data to better whatever product that is that's out there? Is that the next step, or is that something that you're already doing?
That's not something that we're doing, but it's definitely part of the plan to harness the data and actually teach people how to get insight from the data, right? So it's one thing to just take the data and give it back to them, but we feel that it's better to teach them how to read and understand trends over periods of time so they can do this on their own. It's more of something that needs to be cultivated than, just like a one-step shop to, towards it. And I just want to say that, like, sometimes you also have to be kind of slick and gauge your competition. Like I remember way before, like, we were approached with to market an academic competition tool, and we're always trying to find ways to make it better. This was mainly used here in the States, and so I took it to Ghana and did a couple of competitions there, and I realized the kids were always wanting to share their scores. And I was looking at the competition here in the States, and they didn't have that. So it was just basic JavaScript. We added this button to share your score. Came back here, and a company offered to buy that app. And just like that, just from being able to understand what your competition didn't have and how to make it better, we were able to sell this application.
That's awesome. Thank you.
All right, so we're moving on to our final panel. We need one more chair. All right, so our next panelist will be Amadou Dafe, Pap Sam, Samuel Raphael, and Bumi Odumanide.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Calling all panelists. Pat.
So, good afternoon again, everyone. Hello. I'm that one that made you say, so I'm going to say again. Good afternoon. See, y'all don't want to stand up. That's why you said it so loud and clear, right? So good, we got your attention. So our next panel is actually focusing on tech jobs in Africa. Let me tell you a little bit more about what we do. At Innovative, when we actually feature technology applications, or we're talking about the latest in science or engineering, we actually somewhat act like their publicists, because we know that that information is not really getting out there. If you're in Africa, you could see it, but if you're here in the US, you really don't get that information. So we make sure that when we feature an application, we actually act like their publicists for like 2 or 3 weeks. We'll put it all over the place. We'll make sure that it's gotten a lot of attention and a lot of hits. So innovative, that's just one aspect. And then, you know, with my other company, EVOM LLC, we help Africans in the diaspora with their businesses. So if anyone comes to me, business consulting, we tell them how to market, how to get their products out there, how to get your press releases together. So if you actually do have that app, you have the correct information, you know what to say. So this way, it just adds value to whatever you're doing. You don't want to waste your time, you know, get all this together, and then you try to get the information out there, and it just comes out completely wrong by wrong. So that's enough about me, and on to the next panel. So this panel is actually focusing in on, like I mentioned, jobs in Africa. Now, what I've noticed recently, again, based on our publications, there are several new job sites that are actually launched within, you know, Africa. I know there is one, Jobberman, and there is another one called, I think it's Njoku. Yeah, and there is, I think there's another one called World Develop Jobs, and I might have that wrong, but I know there's Job Clicker as well. So, a lot of people are saying, especially Nigeria, I'm from Nigeria, so of course I read everything Nigeria, sorry everybody else, that doesn't mean that we don't love you, but I'm reading Nigeria because I'm from Nigeria right now. So, when I go in to read it, I actually see, you know, that people are like, I can't get a job anywhere, but yet there's all these different, you know, jobs that are out there. What do you think the major issue is, even though there's all these new tech platforms that's launching all these jobs? What do you think that is causing that to happen, but at the same time, people are saying they can't get jobs?
All right, so in terms of jobs in general, I can't speak of that, right? I can only speak on tech jobs.
That's fine, because that's specific to what we're talking about.
Okay, so on some of those, I visited Njoko, the one we talked about. I think he created 2 years ago.
Yes.
He actually won a couple of things based on that. And I was curious to see if there's any tech jobs there. At the time, it was very few. Right. So maybe his content has grown. There was very few. And people don't really hire people for tech jobs in Africa. That's the reality of things. They give you what they call internship. So you graduate, they give you an internship, they don't pay you, or they use you for some things. There's some companies now that do get some developers and just put them to work. But for me, I haven't seen it. That is why we're more interested in doing the outsourcing part. You know, if these developers were getting jobs, or some of the system administrators, by the way, anybody who actually graduated from computer science degree in Africa, most of the time your first job will be a tech support guy. You'll be a network server engineer, or you'll be the guy they say, oh, go fix my Wi-Fi. My internet doesn't work. You fix it. You know.
No, I'm just going to toggle off of your answer before we continue. I'm going to come back to you guys and think about your answers. So, you know, that's looking at it, it goes back down to a trust factor. So are you saying the employers over there, along with the government, is saying their own people, you know, don't have the experience, so they're not going to trust them to put them into these positions? And if they are, because you guys have been to Senegal, Ghana, you know, Nigeria's next. Nigeria again, I'm plugging. So, Nigeria next. What did you observe? And did you manage to make an impact while you were there?
It's a very complex question.
Okay, that's fine.
So it's not too much about them not trusting. First of all, the demand is not high. Okay. Very few business, very rarely you go to a pharmacy, for example, in Dakar, that would have a computer in there to check your order. You come in and write it in the paper. They have this big book. This big book where they write, you know, some of these things. So the demand is not as high as it is in the US. That's the first complex thing. So the second complex thing now, the population, if somebody, for example, wanted the website for a concert or something like that, they would try to find the cheapest guy that they can get it done. So the quality is not there. So it's very complex, and the government doesn't care. Governments do not even think about hiring tech people in the country. First of all, because the initiative do not come from them. Now, I can't speak for all governments, but the initiative doesn't come from them. For example, when they say open data, which is big now because they want to, it's the World Bank that drives that, because they want more transparency on the money they give. You see? So it's a very complex problem. And the only solution we have at this point is offer outsourcing services, build up the skills, and once they notice this, they can easily be transited.
Okay. I was going to switch to Umi. I'm sorry. Before I'm going to come back to you guys.
Well, thank you. So essentially, I think it's building off of what Amadou was saying. It comes down to a skills mismatch with what's existing in the labor market at that time. It's part of it, making sure that for the industries that are there, the developers that are there, or for the IT services that are needed, that the requisite skills, or even sometimes in the labor market situations on the continent, it may not even be the skills, it may be the experience with those skills demonstrated along with other sort of assets, what they call soft skills, that can make them competitive and attractive to that. That's one big dimension of the complex problem, in addition to sort of hiring practices as they were. So what are the channels to which they're able to source that talent and then upskill, even if they have the raw potential and have all those other bases covered. So I think that's a large part of it.
Did you want to answer? I have a question.
Okay.
Follow-up question.
I think you asked a question that's two sub-questions.
Yes.
The first one is just job in general.
Yes.
And the second one is tech job.
Yes.
Both of them actually we spoke about. I think I would start with just job in general. If you look at, for example, let's say African universities.
Right.
They train people, but they train them mostly in things that that doesn't require hands-on stuff like tech stuff and all those things. Most of the tech training you do it somewhere else, or you do it just by doing it by learning. So if you look at the universities, 90% of the graduates of the African universities they don't have jobs. Because the government only employs 10% of those. So 90% they don't have jobs. Because that's what you were talking about, the mismatch. They don't really train, they don't develop their curricula based on the local market and based on the need. Which means that those people they train, they really don't know they don't have anything to do other than. And if you look at also a lot of international businesses or multinational organizations in Africa, they always tell you we cannot find the qualified, the skilled labor in the market because the university don't train for them. That's the first problem. So 90% of them end up going back to entrepreneurship. So now it begs the question of what kind of job you're talking about, private sector, public sector. Because if most of them work on starting their own businesses, we define that as job or not job. What Amadou and his team is doing with Coders4Africa is a job or not job. How do you define it? So now you come back to the tech job. The tech job, the problem here that we have is content. Because technology is translating solution into tools. And content in Africa is the main problem. To control the content, to control the problem. I think that what we have right now with Coders4Africa, training people in coding and programming, we should have the same thing with content. Because what's happening in the international market is try to know what your customers want before they do. You know what that means? It means that try to understand where those people who are supposed to buy are potential buyers. What do they want? Before themselves, they even do know what they want. And that's what you see with the browsers, with Google, everything. Everywhere you go on your computer, the next second you'll see something that's similar to what you're looking for. Because they control your behaviors and everything. In Africa, that's what we don't have. The farmers, the entrepreneurs, the tech people, the government, policies, and all those things we don't have. Amadou was saying it. You go to big offices and enterprises, everything is put on a book and written. How do you transfer that knowledge into the next generation? How do you learn from what you document into the next generation? How do you archive that for 20, 30 years? That's the problem. So tech jobs are people who are translating solutions into tools. But if there is no content to understand the problem to propose solutions, how do you come up with tools that address those things?
Okay. So let's take, for example, Coders4Africa is actually, their mission is to go in, let's go ahead and train so that this way we can build the solution, this way it's outsourcing. So it's a trust, I still go back to trust factor, because obviously they're looking at it as like you're based here in the US, and so you've gained your experiences here in the US. So this leads to my next question, do you think that the diaspora has an obligation, to go back and to do what they're doing? I mean, because right now they're doing it by choice. So our experiences that we're gaining here, based on what you're saying, is more advanced. So do you feel that, we should make that step and say, okay, let's go back and make sure that we can at least do our part or our role for a season, 2 years, whatever the case may be?
Yeah, I do think so. I think that a lot of times when we go back, we're seen as more knowledgeable, whether or not that's right. It's how we're seen, and so I think we have more ability to make an impact there. And my sister was actually here earlier. She's left now, but she moved back to Nigeria after her MBA. She was that committed to taking her knowledge back there, and she's not in technology, but still, But I do think those of us that are here, we do have some obligation to go back and make that difference because we're probably the most likely to.
Okay. And then, I don't know if, have you guys heard of African American Institute? Okay, which before they used to bring people here and receive the education, and then, they said that they're changing their model, and part of the reason why is because they realized that, the people that were coming over didn't have relationship tie-ins. They graduate and they didn't really meet anyone that they could say, okay, hey, friend, I need this, or I'm learning this. So then, eventually you go back, within Africa, and, you actually would implement what you learned, but you wouldn't have any resources because you didn't go to school with anyone. I mean, this is a hypothetical. Do you think that, we should look to do more initiatives like those, to where we actually still, bring people back here versus, just saying, I'm going to train you in a place where you're not going to get, the latest educational tools as it relates to specifically technology, because that's the need. And as we know, the generation is pushing forward with technology.
I think, if you allow me, I'll just go back to the question and try to this first one. For me, the notion of, sorry, I just want to speak like this. Or you can hold it for me. The notion of us, the diaspora, going back to solve the problems, I think for me, that's not something that's standing at all. Because those people who are there, let's not fool ourselves, they have skills.
Right.
They have ways of doing things and solving problems.
Mm-hmm.
The only difference between us and them is that we are exposed to more problems and more solutions in terms of this diversity.
Right.
They're exposed to the African problems and the African solutions, which they know very well. We can tap into additional resources and network. They can't. That's the only difference. But it's not because we are smarter than them. So the notion of going back to save or solve the problems, for me, is not something that's pending, and I haven't seen any data or any research that really back that or prove that. That's the first thing.
Okay.
The second one, to tie that into your question of bringing here or taking there or developing all this kind of program. Yes, I think anything that exposes anybody to a new thing, different options, is good. Because you cannot choose if you don't have two options.
Right.
By traveling, by meeting new people, you see more problems, but you also see more solutions.
Right.
So it's really good to bring them here, or for us to go there. And I think most of us as well, we have to say that we are still connected to the continent. We travel, we go there, and the ones that stay here, because Africans are the most educated community in the US. Right. The ones that stay here is because of student loan.
Exactly. And you rack them up.
And mortgage.
Yeah.
So if they can pay that off, you know that Rachel wants to go, I want to be here. Okay, go home. Right. So can we find jobs that can pay us that much to be able to pay off this debt or this student loan? If we can figure that out, we'll be able to move forward to go because we'll have some kind of life.
I'll add something. I I think for me, so far, I've looked at all the models, right? How do we do this, what they call brain game, right? Going back and stuff. I think that, for me, the only option at this point for us is to create businesses, right? The businesses that links it back, or businesses there. So sometimes I have people that we talk about, they always complain how the government doesn't do this, how much. The first thing I ask them, how many jobs have you created in Africa? Have you created one? Do you own land?
No.
Okay, do you own a farm? You know, those are the questions that, because if you go back and take somebody's job, you're adding to the problem. So some of these big organizations where they call it expat, right? You go back, you get all the benefits that are taken away. I think that if we have some sort of entrepreneur mindset in the diaspora, it just creates jobs like we do at Coders4Africa, like he's doing, right? Keep going, I think that's going to make a change, at least for.
Final.
Yeah, I mean, just piggybacking on all these comments, I think and we do more research on this, I think, in the sense that I feel like the diaspora severely underplays its opportunity to become a market maker and actually to generate value in real terms for itself in the diaspora through being its link to the global market. I think that's a huge underplay that could actually help basically indirectly achieve some of these goals we want to see in our individual countries. Because sort of to Pop's statement, in those countries you have folks already, working in the process to meet their needs. They need partners like everybody else needs partners. I mean, folks from here need partners. They outsource to Taiwan and to China to build your iPhone. That's a partnership. But at the end of the day, I feel like the diaspora has an extreme amount of runway left that we haven't even touched, that you can actually generate a substantial livelihood for yourself by being that good partner on this side.
Did you guys have any questions for the panelists on tech jobs? I mean, y'all just looking dead faced like.
How many of you want to go back to Africa? So you got questions.
Yeah. All right, so my last question. All right.
I don't know if it's a question of just to add to what they were saying. I think, to me, it's really not a question of are you going back or are you staying here. It's more about where you can be more effective, especially about the tech jobs. I don't think, where you are physically matters anymore. It's more about what you can create, because everything is linked now. You can be here and have a team in Africa. They can be there and know the same thing, So it's, to me, that question is really not that relevant anymore. And like Amadou does, he can go back if he needs to. Stay here to connect with his partners and make everything easier altogether. So I just wanted to add that.
Just gonna play devil's advocate with your statement. I mean, I agree with you. Connectivity and internet access and all the things that we have access to, technology allows you to be in many places all at one time. But I still feel that I don't care what you own, there has to be a connection to the community that you're in. So, and I think that without, this is just me personally, that without that connection to that community, you may not be able to maintain that community in whatever business that you're doing. So there has to be something, because not one size doesn't fit all. I mean, I think that there are certain apps that are tweaked based on areas. So, and that's why I think that, yes, you could possibly get started, but I don't think you could maintain that. There has to be something that connects you, back to the community. That's why, I asked them those questions. Because I've seen it one too many times. Like, I'll just give you an example. Uber. There's Uber USA. There's Uber Nigeria. There's Uber Ghana. There's Uber. I mean, it is tailored towards that community, literally. All the marketing from that community, all the coupons or whatever they make for that community. So I think ultimately it has to tie into the community that you're in. What do you guys think?
I agree, and specifically, I think to the diaspora and the kind of connecting it with the outsourcing, the job creation capability. I feel that in terms of the diaspora, its potential, especially in the area of access to finance, which is a challenge. Frankly speaking, whether it's folks within the continent or Africans in the diaspora, especially in technology, you see the data that came out recently from some of the major tech companies. Both women and minorities in general are just not given visibility, are not given that exposure. And I feel as if before we ask that from just the broader tech community, in this community we need to take ourselves a little bit more seriously. Right. And that's why an event like even today is key to sort of creating that type of collaborative environment, dialogue, and trust, such that if a deal, like at the end of the day, it comes down to deals, value creation, jobs. Like that's what matters. And those get done on things bigger than just two people. Right? It takes partnerships, collaboration, and money. And I feel like the diaspora within ourselves, we have to upgrade even somehow. Like if someone is not giving enough finance to some of these early stage startups, the diaspora should step up a little bit and figure out what of our problems intersect with some of these startups and how can we position them for early seed funding. We have to evolve to figuring out our roles in some of these, pipelines that can create the jobs in this sector. So, right.
Here's an idea: diaspora fund. We're already funding our
angels.
Yeah, angels. I don't like angels. Angels are dangerous. But what I'm saying is, we're already sending billions of dollars into Africa every year to our family, right? So if we could find some sort of organization that creates a fund, right? I start with us. We take part of the money that we generate from our organization, create a fund, and help the starters back home. The good start. So let's not just talk about it. We coders, we like to execute on things.
I see the shaking of the head. The thought flow that went through.
I think the tech people are speaking, but let's bring it down a little bit before we fly. I know Shia is not going home anytime soon. Yes, we're sending a lot of money home, but let's ask ourselves why we're sending it home. To feed our parents, families, and brothers and all those things, right? So that money is already taken. If you're getting it down, it's going to be a problem. So that money, but I like the idea of African fund. Now, how are we going to do it? That's, I think, the main thing. For me, like you were saying, I agree pretty much in general, but I think it's the execution that's more like the problem than anything else, the ideas. If you look at what we all doing, like entrepreneurship, innovation, so on, so on, so on, so on, we're doing it for a reason. Some of us are doing it for our passion. But why we should really do it to create jobs, like you said, is creating the job. But how do we create jobs? That's the main problem we should ask ourselves. Our private sector in Africa is really good, but it's not organized. And if you look at it, we have three main industries right now in this world. Businesses, government, and civil society. But those three industries, they are not doing the work. You know why? Because they're not connected. And there is only one industry among those three that creates wealth: businesses. They pay taxes, they create jobs, they create employment, and then non-profit and civil society take it for free. Government take it as well to invest back on community. Non-profit take it to invest back on community. So what is the tie here? Communities. That's what everybody wants to invest back to. But we are in a capitalistic system where money matters and money is fake. If you don't have the money, you won't work. So now, where do you get the money to create that fund? Where do you get the money to create those jobs? It's skills, it's skills, skills. You're doing it in the tech world. But where are we failing, Africans? Where are we failing, all of us, is the translation. How do Coders4Africa can not only solve the problem? Because they wouldn't exist if there was no PAPSAM, no SEND to tell them we have this problem, figure that out. So we have to come up with all those things. What I would suggest, instead of your wonderful idea, is for all of us to commit that will identify the problem, will identify the problem, and create African content and give them the problems for them to come up with the solution. Once we do that, we'll be able to study. Why Google is Google? Content.
Can I answer? We go at it, you know each other. So.
We do that all the time.
So the first thing is, let me talk about a company called Kiva.org.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know how much money they generated the first time they earned, I think the first 2 years? $400 million. If those, how many of you heard of Kiva.org? It's a microfinancing company to small businesses, or I think they started with agriculture people in Africa, but then they went to other parts of the world. And I know the lady, I met her. We actually sit in the panel together at a university called Jewel in New Jersey. All she did was, she knew there was a problem, poverty problem, where she sees people that can build their own business, but they don't have the funding for it. She didn't even think about community, all of that type of stuff. She had the idea. She knew this needs to be done. All she did was create a site called Kiva.org. However, she put a whole network around it with the financing, all the stuff, all of the hype, the perception that you put out there, right? By having somebody high profile talk about it, and then boom, that's how it happened.